Every megachurch in America explained in 60 seconds. Part 11, 2819 Church. 2819 Church in Atlanta is one of the fastest growing churches in America right now. In 2023, it launched with 183 people. Today, it draws around 6,000 every Sunday, with some arriving as early as 5:30 in the morning just to get a seat. Young adults are flying in from other states. A recent prayer event drew more people than State Farm Arena could hold. The name comes from Matthew 28:19, the Great Commission. Make disciples of all nations. That is the entire mission of the church summarized in one number. Pastor Philip Anthony Mitchell preaches straight through the Bible, verse by verse, and I think that's one of the biggest reasons for the church's explosive growth. In a generation that has been fed watered-down theology, entertainment-driven worship, and motivational speeches dressed up as sermons, a pastor who just opens the Bible and tells the truth is genuinely rare. The one thing worth watching is how some members of the congregation talk about their pastor. Some have openly said they regret coming to service when Mitchell is not the one preaching. People describe the atmosphere in near spiritual terms, as if the experience is tied to the man in the room rather than the God being worshipped. Mitchell himself has said he feels ill-equipped for the platform he has been given, which suggests he is aware of the weight. But when a congregation starts showing up for a person rather than a message, that is always worth paying attention to, regardless of how sound the pastor is. And here is something else that gets lost in the excitement around churches this size. If your pastor has never seen your face, does not know your name, and has no idea you exist, then you do not actually have a pastor. You have a favorite preacher. That is not the same thing. The New Testament model of a pastor is someone who knows their sheep, someone who can pray for you by name, walk with you through difficulty, and speak into your actual life. Hearing someone speak through a screen weekly will never be the same as having a pastor that actually knows you. In a generation that has been seeking something that is authentic, I think that 2819 is giving people exactly what they are looking for. The only thing to watch is whether the congregation can keep their eyes on Jesus when their pastor is not in the room. Part 12. North Point Church. North Point Community Church in Alpharetta, Georgia was founded by Andy Stanley in 1995 and grew into one of the largest church networks in America, drawing around 37,000 weekly attendees across multiple campuses. Stanley is the son of Charles Stanley, one of the most respected conservative Bible teachers of the 20th century. For years, Andy built on that legacy and was considered one of the most influential evangelical pastors in the country. In 2018, Stanley said Christianity needed to be unhitched from the Old Testament, arguing that the faith should stand on the resurrection alone without the weight of Mosaic law. The pushback from most people who've ever opened their Bibles was immediate. Then, in 2023, North Point hosted the Unconditional Conference, an event for parents of LGBTQ children that featured speakers who argued the traditional Christian view of sexuality causes harm and misreads Scripture. Al Mohler called it a direct departure from historic biblical Christianity. Stanley's response was that Mohler's version of Christianity is exactly why people are leaving the church. At this point, I wouldn't even consider this a church. A leaked video later showed North Point's middle school ministry director explaining how the church ministers to a child who identifies as transgender with no reference to biblical teaching on gender, which at this point surprised no one. Stanley has framed all of this as being welcoming rather than affirming, but at some point, that distinction stops holding. North Point continues to teach that biblical marriage is the union of one man and one woman on paper, while in practice, making space for gay marriages among its members and calling it pastoral. To conclude, this is not a church, and I don't think you could possibly have any defense of attending something like this, aside from just not caring. There are so many better options. Please just go somewhere that cares more about your salvation than affirming sin. Part 13. Crossroads Church. Crossroads Church in Cincinnati, Ohio was founded by Brian Tome in 1995 and has grown to nearly 40,000 members across 14 locations in Ohio and Kentucky, making it one of the largest churches in the country. It markets itself as a place for people who have given up on church, but not on God. And based on the way it operates, you can see exactly what it means by that. Crossroads is known for its theatrical approach to church services. Every Super Bowl Sunday, the church transforms its lobby into a stadium tailgate with hot dogs and drinks. Pastors enter the auditorium like MMA fighters, and a preaching contest is held between staff. In 2020, a female teaching pastor kicked a Bible off the stage and into the crowd as a sermon illustration. In 2024, a rodeo star broke a wild horse on stage during a live sermon. And of course, there's an At the Movies series. Then, in February 2026, Tome was suspended from all pastoral responsibilities pending an independent investigation. The accusation was described by the church initially as inappropriate physical humor from a 2015 video shoot. What actually came out was that Tome was accused of whipping a man with a horse crop and rubbing it against his body during an encounter at his church office. A staff member was also fired in January after police discovered he had been secretly filming women at a local gym. Crossroads spent 30 years building a church around the idea that unconventional methods reach unconventional people. That might be true, but methodology cannot substitute for accountability. Part 14. Fellowship Church. Fellowship Church in Grapevine, Texas is one of the largest churches in America. Ed Young Jr., son of Second Baptist Houston pastor Ed Young Sr., founded it in 1990 with 30 families in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. Today it draws around 24 24,000 weekly attendees across multiple campuses in Texas, runs an in-house worship band called Fellowship Creative that is charted on Billboard, and hosts the annual C3 conference, drawing thousands of church leaders from across the country. The church sits in the seeker-sensitive tradition, emphasizing creative communication, high production value, and making Christianity accessible to people who would not typically walk into a traditional church. Young has written multiple New York Times best-selling books and launched CreativePastors.com to equip church leaders with resources. The church also operates Alasso Ranch, a 500-acre camp and retreat center in East Texas, used for youth programs and conferences. The main gripe that many have found in Fellowship is the improper use of funds. In 2010, Young was criticized for his luxurious lifestyle, including the purchase of a Falcon 50 private jet valued at $8.4 million, an annual housing allowance of $240,000, and a salary of around $1 million per year. Former staff described a culture of increasing lavish spending and decreasing accountability, while attendance was quietly declining. The concerns around Fellowship Church have less to do with what is being taught on Sunday mornings and more to do with financial transparency and accountability structures around its leadership. A church that size, with that level of influence, owes its congregation clear answers about how it operates behind the scenes. That is not a theological critique. It is just a basic standard that any institution handling that much money and influence should be held to. Part 15. Southeast Christian Church. Southeast Christian Church in Louisville, Kentucky, is one of the most quietly impressive megachurches in America. Founded in 1962, with 125 members meeting in a church basement, it now draws around 28,000 weekly attendees across 15 campuses throughout Kentucky, southern Indiana, and Tennessee, ranking it 9th largest in the country. The church is part of the Restoration movement, an evangelical tradition rooted in the idea of returning to simple New Testament Christianity without denominational creeds or traditions. That theological foundation has kept Southeast anchored in scripture-focused, expository preaching across decades and multiple pastoral transitions. Bob Russell served as senior pastor for 40 years, building the church from 125 members to over 18,000 before handing off leadership in 2006. Kyle Idleman, one of the most widely read Christian authors in America today, now leads the church. His books, Not a Fan and Aha, have sold millions of copies and are used in churches and small groups worldwide. Southeast has also facilitated over $1.7 million in relief efforts across 24 countries and merged with Franklin Christian Church in Tennessee in January 2025, adding a 15th campus. What makes Southeast worth paying attention to is what it is not doing. It is not chasing celebrity culture. It is not generating financial scandals. It is not producing viral controversies every 6 months. It is just preaching the Bible, serving its community, and growing steadily. In a series full of cautionary tales, Southeast Christian Church is a genuinely encouraging story. Part 16. Prestonwood Baptist Church. Prestonwood Baptist Church is one of the largest Southern Baptist churches in America. Founded in 1977 with a handful of people meeting in a North Dallas recreation center, it now draws around 17,000 weekly attendees across 2 massive campuses covering nearly 300 combined acres in Plano and Prosper, with over 49,000 people calling it home. The Plano campus alone features a 7,000-seat worship center, a K-12 school with a football stadium, a fitness center, a cafe, a library, and a bookstore. It is essentially a small city organized around a church. Jack Graham has led Prestonwood since 1989 and built its television ministry, PowerPoint Ministries, into a broadcast operation reaching millions through television, radio, and online platforms. Graham has also been one of the most visible Southern Baptist voices in American public life, most recently leading prayer over Donald Trump at the 2024 National Faith Summit. Theologically, Prestonwood sits in conservative Southern Baptist territory. The church affirms the inerrancy of Scripture, holds to complementarian leadership, and has consistently aligned with the more conservative wing of the SBC. The shadow over Prestonwood's legacy is a 2022 SBC abuse investigation that found a youth music minister named John Langworthy had been sexually abusing boys while on staff, and when Graham discovered it in 1989, he allegedly allowed Langworthy to be quietly dismissed without reporting the abuse to police. Langworthy did not stop. He moved on to other churches and continued abusing children for years before finally being convicted of child sexual assault in Mississippi in 2013. Survivors came forward publicly, documentation was made available, and through all of it, Graham gave no detailed public statement, did not address it from the pulpit, and did not speak directly to the people who were harmed. For a church that broadcasts its pastor's voice to millions and positions itself as a pillar of conservative evangelical Christianity, the gap between that public platform and its private accountability is one that 49,000 members deserve a real answer to. Part 17. World Changers Church International. World Changers Church International in College Park, Georgia, was founded by Creflo in 1986 with 8 people meeting in an elementary school cafeteria. Today, it draws around 30,000 members weekly from its home base, the 8,500-seat World Dome in Atlanta. Dollar's television broadcast, Changing Your World, reaches nearly every country on Earth. By any measure, it is a massive operation built by one man around one message, and that message is the problem. Dollar has spent most of his career as one of the most prominent figures in the prosperity gospel, also known as the Word of Faith movement, which teaches that financial blessing and physical health are always God's will, that believers can speak wealth into existence, and that financial giving to the church is seed faith that God will multiply back to the giver. The lifestyle that came with it has been hard to ignore. Dollar has driven a Rolls-Royce, flown in private jets, and lived in a $1 million home behind iron gates. In 2015, he launched a campaign asking his congregation to donate $65 million for a Gulfstream G650 private jet, calling it a ministry necessity. Here is what is genuinely interesting about Dollar's story. In 2022, he publicly retracted his long-held teaching on mandatory tithing, stating it is not required for New Testament believers. That is a significant theological reversal for a man who built his entire ministry on the idea that giving unlocks God's financial favor. The problem is that retracting one teaching does not undo decades of telling poor people that their poverty was a faith problem. That damage does not disappear with a statement. Part 18. Willow Creek Community Church. Willow Creek in South Barrington, Illinois is where the seeker-sensitive church movement started. Bill Hybels founded it in 1975 by literally knocking on doors in the Chicago suburbs, asking unchurched people why they did not go to church, and then building a church designed around the answers. At its peak, 25,000 people showed up every weekend. Hundreds of churches across America tried to copy the model. Then, in 2018, the Chicago Tribune dropped an investigation into Bill Hybels. Decades of sexual misconduct, suggestive comments, unwanted physical contact, invitations to hotel rooms, a sexual relationship with a female employee. When the story broke, the elder board rallied around him, denied the allegations, and accused the women of lying and colluding. The congregation gave Hybels a standing ovation when he stepped down. What came after was pretty quick. Hybels resigned. The pastors who replaced him resigned. The entire elder board resigned. Thousands of members left. Campuses started closing and staff got laid off in waves. Willow Creek still exists. It still meets on Sundays, but it is a fraction of what it was, and the model it pioneered has never quite recovered its credibility. The seeker-sensitive approach is not automatically wrong, but Willow Creek is the clearest example of what happens when you build a church around a man without building any real accountability around him. Nobody wanted to ask the hard questions because the whole thing was working, until it was not. Part 19. Dream City Church. Dream City Church in Phoenix, Arizona has been around longer than most megachurches anyone has ever heard of. It was founded in 1923 as Phoenix First Assembly of God, making it over 100 years old. Most churches do not survive a century. This one grew into one of the largest Assemblies of God congregations in America. The man who built it into what it is today was Barnett, who took over in 1978 and spent the next 3 decades turning a mid-sized Pentecostal congregation into a 22,000 weekly attendance operation. In 2011, he handed leadership to his son Luke Barnett, who has kept it growing across multiple campuses in Phoenix, Scottsdale, and Glendale. What sets Dream City apart from most churches its size is the Phoenix Dream Center, a full-scale outreach operation in the middle of the city, providing housing for trafficking survivors, addiction recovery programs, food distribution, and services for the homeless. It is not a line item in the budget. It is a significant ministry infrastructure that serves thousands of vulnerable people in the Phoenix area every year. Theologically, Dream City sits in mainstream Assemblies of God Pentecostalism. The Barnetts have stayed away from the prosperity gospel excesses and the charismatic chaos that has derailed other large Pentecostal churches. The preaching is evangelistic, the missions emphasis is real, and the church runs Dream City College in partnership with Southeastern University to train the next generation of ministry leaders. After 100 years, 2 pastoral generations, and tens of thousands of people served through the Dream Center, Dream City Church has built something genuinely worth paying attention to. It is not a perfect institution, but it is one of the clearest examples in this series of a large church that has kept its focus on actual ministry rather than celebrity, controversy, or brand building. Part 20. Christ Fellowship. We've made it to the end of this series, so thanks to everyone who's been here since the start. Christ Fellowship in Palm Beach Gardens, Florida, started the way a lot of great churches do. Tom and Donna Mullins, 40 people, someone's living room, 1984. Today it draws nearly 30,000 people every weekend across 17 locations throughout South Florida. That is a long way from a living room in Palm Beach County. The church is part of ARC, the Association of Related Churches, which keeps showing up in this series because its fingerprints are on a lot of the fastest growing churches in America right now. Christ Fellowship also has John C. Maxwell on staff as a teaching pastor, which is not a small thing. Maxwell is one of the most widely read leadership authors in the world. Tom and Donna eventually handed the church off to their son Todd and his wife Julie, which actually actually seems to have went well. The church also does pretty good community work as well. Christ Fellowship helped found Church United, a coalition of local churches doing regional outreach together, and has long supported Place of Hope, a residential program for abused and neglected children in South Florida. No major doctrinal controversies, no financial scandals, no pastor resigning in disgrace. After covering Hillsong, Gateway, Prestonwood, and Crossroads in this same series, that actually feels worth saying. Some churches just do the work, pass the baton, and keep going. Christ Fellowship seems to be one of them.